lot of people wonder if Bigfoot can be real. I personally believe Bigfoot is real. Undoubtedly, I believe Bigfoot is real. I'm just going to leave it at that for right now. I've always been, it's been a passing interest, but for as long as I can remember, you know, my dad, I used to stay up late and watch the documentaries with, that was hosted by Spock from Star Trek. So, you know, I know all about the Yeti and Bigfoot, Sasquatch. Actually, interestingly, pretty much all around the world, there's some form of a Bigfoot. There's another interesting thing about Bigfoot that people don't think of. The Yeti, Bigfoot, I can't remember the exact name of it down in Peru. Macanbawa or I can't remember the exact name of it off the top of my head, but even they have a Bigfoot in South America. But there's an interesting thing. When you look at all these different, even here in the United States, you have the skunk ape, Sasquatch, you know, they all, just like the human race, they're similar, but different. Like, for example, the smallest Sasquatch that, you know, there's a Sasquatch that's reported in like China. And just like the Chinese people tend to be small, that Sasquatch tends to be small. As you get up in the mountains, where mountain men tend to get bigger and bigger and bigger, as a species, even us as a species, we tend to be bigger and bigger and bigger, you know, especially in the mountains. Any form of Sasquatch or Bigfoot in the mountains tends to be bigger. You get here in the United States and it's the same thing. You get down in the swamplands, the skunk ape tends to be smaller. Get up in the mountains, tends to be bigger. You know, there's a lot of things about Sasquatch that when you just look at the human species, they make sense. Even their hair color. The hair color, you know, you can find variations throughout the world, but they tend to have distinct hair colors depending on where you find them. And there's another commonality that it has with the human species, which is the majority of them tend not to be homicidal. They do tend to be territorial, just like us, you know, but they tend to be compassionate. Even when they're being territorial, they tend to be compassionate. There's different, you'll notice different, you know, you'll hear stories about some, just like people, they'll be more violently territorial, and other ones will just be aggressively, compassionately territorial. And then you have your psychotics. There have always been stories of violent Sasquatch encounters that, you know, even that it seems unprovoked, it attack, even in Indian legends and all around the world. But they tend to be a very small number of those types of stories. Just like when you really think about it, the numbers of human beings on the planet, the number of actual violent human beings tends to be pretty small, you know, as far as just psychotic killers. I think Sasquatch is definitely out of the humanoid family, for sure. I mean, it looks like us, but there's a story that a lot of people aren't familiar with. Some are and some aren't. I don't know how much they're teaching this in school right now, but most people seem to think that man, you know, of course, modern man, Homo sapien, you know, us, we've obviously can go back 100,000 years, but our history goes back much further than that. And it goes back much further than what most people realize. Lucy is the oldest humanoid fossil ever found. And she's 3 million years old. But we know for a fact that upright humanoid species, which would be our ancestors, our earliest ancestors, goes back at least, we know for a fact they go back 3.5 million years. We know this from the fossil records because of the upright footprints in volcanic ash 3.5 million years ago. There's a lot of this stuff you can learn just by, I'm going to put the link in my YouTube video when I upload this to YouTube, but if you're watching this on something like Facebook, go back and just look at the origins of the human species on YouTube. It's a 3-part series, and the information in there is amazing, what you learn. But there's a story to that when you look at Sasquatch and you look at the way we evolved, there's a question as to whether or not Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Yeti, you know, the species that, you know, all evolves around the Sasquatch type humanoid all around the world, whether or not it's a remnant of the Neanderthals. You can see the resemblance of Sasquatch and the Neanderthal, but it's still not exactly the same, and we can trace it from Lucy. There's an interesting thing about Lucy. They found other bones from her species in the same time period, and they realized that Lucy stood about 3.5 foot tall. She stood upright, but the males were approximately 6 to 7 foot tall. Now, when you put that in perspective and think about us, your average woman is in the 5 foot range. Your average man is closer to the 6 foot range. It makes an interesting story there, doesn't it? Women grew, but men seem to have shrunk. Because your average man today is what, 5'10"? 5'10", 5'11", 5'8", somewhere in there is the average male. Of course, we have taller men and we have shorter men, but you know, the average, I think it's somewhere between 5'8" and 5'11". So we'll say 5'9" just for our, we're 5'9" to 5'10" for argument's sake. But women did grow taller. Women grew from 3.5 foot tall to an average of what, 5'2", 5'4", something like that. Your average woman. from Lucy, who was 3.5 foot tall. The thing about Lucy and her species is it does fit in with the African origins theory. But when you trace how we evolved out of Lucy, it brings up a question. And it's not a question that, at least not on anything that I've found, that science has addressed, which is, did any of Lucy's origins, did that anywhere branch? We have all their fossil records showing what happened with the species leading up to us in Africa. But what happened if that species ever branched off and some of that species started going north? There's things about us that when you follow that, we can see why we evolved the way we evolved. Now let's say a group of the same species from Lucy, or maybe even predating Lucy. Let's go back. Let's say, here's a really interesting idea. Let's say that, somewhere in there, just like crocodiles, alligators, eels, numerous other species, that sharks, they haven't really evolved much since their existence, even while they were beside dinosaurs. They haven't evolved much. What if our species did the same thing? What if, say, even 4 million, we got 3.5 million years ago that we know we existed. What if 4 million years ago we existed? 5 million years ago we existed, and because we can't find the fossil record, there's a difference between reality and existence. Reality is what science proves. Existence is what's possible. Whatever is actually possible. And the possibility is there that we existed 4.5 million years ago, 5 million years ago. What if we stalled for a time? What if we stalled for 1 million years, 2 million years, and we didn't go through an evolutionary process? And during that evolutionary process, part of our species traveled north. If part of our species traveled north, that means the whole evolutionary link and jumps that we took, we would have took earlier on with that species traveling north. It's from the necessary, it's from the first thing around it is the environment. The environment makes all our evolutionary jumps happen. But if our species traveled north, that environmental change came sooner, and that jump would have taken place sooner in that species, and it could have evolved into a whole nother species, which could have evolved into Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, the whatever they call it in Peru, whatever they call it in China. They're all, as they all branched out around the world, that species could have made that jump sooner. Because we know what happened with Lucy. We went from being just gatherers, fending for ourselves, and we were the prey. We weren't the hunters, we were the prey at that time. And then eventually we became gatherers and scavengers. But if a group set off north, they would have became a scavenger sooner. And for example, when they hit the coastlines, while our species was still being a vegetarian, this species could have started eating the shellfish, which is a very big part of the evolution of the brain, where we evolved. If they started eating the shellfish first out of hunger, before they started eating meat, they would have taken that evolutionary jump before we did. Our first evolutionary jump comes from when we start becoming scavengers. We were using stone tools 1.5 million years ago. And the reason we were using stone tools was to crack open bones. We were following around the lions and the hyenas. And they were eating all the meat, but they weren't eating the marrow and the bones. We were eating the marrow and the bones. And we have the fossil record to prove this. With the stone tools to prove this. So what if that species that went north didn't necessarily go into that form of the scavenger mode, but they went into that where they started eating the shellfish? And their whole evolutionary development took a whole different route. And that's why they look like the Neanderthal in many ways. But in other ways, they don't look anything like the Neanderthal. I mean, they're very... When you take the description of a Neanderthal and you take the description of a Sasquatch and you take everything but height and you put them down on paper, just the description on paper, they're very similar. They're extremely similar. The difference is the Neanderthal used tools. The Neanderthal is more like the human species in height, but they're bulkier. And they're bigger. And it's because of the environment that they were bulkier and bigger. Not necessarily taller, but just bigger and stronger and more muscular than the human species that, are humans, our branch. Because see, already we see how it all branched out. There's multiple human species that we know of. That we know there was 3 human species that all existed at the same time. I can't remember all their names. I remember the Neanderthal for sure, and then you got us. But there was definitely another one. And then we know that there was another species that was almost like a hobbit that still existed within our existence. And, I think there's 5 or 6 human species that they think existed all at the same time. So why can't Bigfoot be the remnant of one of our species that actually... And that's why there's so many similarities between us and the Neanderthal and the ape and so on and so forth. And we know we evolved from a chimp. We know this. If you believe in evolution. If you can believe in God and still believe it. I believe in God and I believe in evolution. Because I believe I'm more like Benjamin Franklin. I believe that, God put everything in motion. God put everything there for us to start evolving. And it doesn't mean that God didn't create us. He just maybe created us a different way than the Bible explained it. So, if you're just going to believe in it on the theological side, obviously you don't believe in evolution, and, that's a whole different story. But if you believe in evolution, this isn't a hard leap to take. This actually makes a lot of sense. The Bigfoot tribe, or that branch of us, has obviously always been smaller. You know, people like to argue, why haven't we ever found bones or anything? You know, I grew up in the woods. I've seen one live bear. I've actually seen one live bear in the woods with my own eyes. I've heard bear a few times, and I know they were bear, but I've actually only seen a bear once with my own eyes alive. I've only ever seen one bear carcass, and I've never seen a bear bone. And I grew up in the woods. Grew up hunting with my dad, fishing. I spent the first 33 years of my life in and around the woods, growing up in the country. I've seen one live bear. Ironically, I've seen more Bigfoot. And I've never seen bones from a bear. I've seen one bear carcass. And ironically, that bear carcass was on one of the wood roads in the Ocala forest. It got hit by a car or a truck or something, and it was dead on the side of the road. I'm sorry, I've seen 2 bear carcasses. That's right. I came up. Actually, that bear had just been freshly hit, and the guy was still there. His pickup truck was totaled out. So I've seen 2 bears, 2 dead bears. That one I've only seen in the last, both of them, and then I've seen only in Florida. I grew up in the mountains and I never saw a dead bear. Come down to Florida, I saw 2 of them within my first 3 years of being in first 4 years of being in Florida. Go figure. But this whole idea that, you know, why we would never find them, that's kind of, you know, that's explanatory. But when you look at the evolution, our evolution starting with Lucy, and you look at the scientific facts and theories backed by facts, and you look how we evolved from Lucy, and then you look how at some point we branched, and Neanderthal man branched, and the other species of humans all branched. When you understand the evolution of the Neanderthal, it's not a hard leap to go back 3.5 million years ago, 4 million years ago. Somewhere we branched, and some of us stayed in Africa, and some of us went north. And when you look at the way the Neanderthal evolved from a later species of us, what would have happened if the Neanderthal evolved at an earlier species of us? Seven-foot tall male species. You go north, where the environment is harsher. The environment forces more things to take place, such as eating the shellfish and having some form of evolutionary jump there. And then you have the survival of the fittest, which means only the largest of the group is going to survive in that harsher environment. Then you start getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The same way we grew, that Neanderthal, the same way the Neanderthal got bulkier, but it got bulkier in an easier climate. Two and a half million years ago, the Ice Age started. The only way, if a species 3.5, 4 million years ago branched off and went north, it would have been going north in a warmer climate. But it would have still been that big species, that 6 to 7 foot tall males. When it went north in that warmer climate, starts to evolve from eating the shellfish, because it's still a gatherer, but it gets up there where, you know, food is scarce. Like, it gets up around the Mediterranean Sea and up around the coastlines, and maybe it wasn't even out of starvation. Maybe it was just gathered and realized, hey, this is food, and started eating the fish, and that started the evolutionary process. Then the Ice Age comes in. Now the smallest of them start dying off. The biggest of them start passing that gene that allowed them to be big in the first place, keeps passing on, and the smallest are dying off, and only the biggest, strongest are surviving, and they're getting bigger and stronger because of where they are. The whole evolution into something like a Sasquatch, Yeti, Mepinguaro. The Mepinguaro, and I can't remember the name of the one from China, but you know, all over the world, there's these species of Sasquatch, and they all fit in place. They all fit for their environment. The descriptions that people give of them, they fit for the environment they're in. So it all makes sense. So there's no reason why, I don't understand why science doesn't accept the possibility that Sasquatch, they can at least say, okay, they can prove it. I mean, I'm just an everyday average guy. I mean, you know, granted, you know, borderline genius, even though I'm a high school dropout, but, you know, still, I'm an everyday guy. I'm a high school dropout. Doesn't matter that I'm borderline genius. I'm a high school freaking dropout. And I can put these pieces together and I can lay it out and it makes sense. And I'm using the same exact theory that science is telling us is the reality. So if science already says this is how it happens and that it does happen, how's science going to say, oh, well, you know, yeah, this is what happened, this is how it happened. Oh, no, that's not at all possible. Nope, that's not at all possible. But meanwhile, science admits exactly that happened. Because that's why the Neanderthal man evolved the way the Neanderthal did. So what if it happened earlier with our earliest ancestors? Oh, no, that can't happen. That's impossible. Nope, 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 nope. It makes no sense. Not science. The argument from the scientists makes no sense. The actual theory makes complete sense. But the actual argument from the scientists makes no sense. You know, so, I don't know. I don't talk much about Bigfoot. Touchy subject. But, I've always followed things, and, you know, it's been one of them things that, you know, like I said, it's just been something on the side where, you know, over the years, and I've been looking for Atlantis since like 3rd grade, so I've spent close to 40 years, you know, 37, 38 years gathering little bits and pieces of the real Atlantis, not the myth. Like the Bimini Road, that's a natural event. You know, so I'm skeptical enough to be able to look at things and come up with actual realistic reasoning behind it. Like I said, like the Bimini Road, that's a natural event. Science even proves how that happens. You know, it's just using science to come up with the reasoning. And the reasoning all points to what Sasquatch would be and why it would exist. So I don't know. I just thought I think it's an interesting theory. maybe there's someone out there in science that, you know, will actually care enough to say, you know, we need to put this to an end or prove it's real. I mean, people don't realize, like here in North America, as a landmass, we only live in 20% of North America. We're spread out. Yeah, we're spread out. But the reality is, we only live in 20% of North America. And they say there's no place for it to hide. If we only reside in if there's 80% of this continent unoccupied, that's a pretty big chunk of land for something to hide. I mean, look at all the years that they said the giant squid, they said the Kraken. The idea that the Kraken, I can actually explain how the whole myth of the Kraken came out of people seeing the giant squid, which, you know, they said didn't exist, and now, you know, we know it's real. I mean, thing's a monster, but they said it was impossible. Now we know it's real. They understood, even when they were, you know, back then, they understood what icebergs were and everything, okay? But they didn't, you know, when they saw the icebergs, they usually just saw them all in certain times of the year that made sense. And they were always, you know, it was multiple icebergs. You know, you didn't have just a lone iceberg out there. Or they didn't normally see a lone iceberg. Now, at odd times of the year, an iceberg, you know, big chunk of ice, we know because we witnessed this already. We witnessed this in our time. Big chunks of ice break off of the glacial, you know, North Pole, South Pole, whatever, when it shouldn't. And it's out there floating and you got this lone piece of ice. Now imagine you're out in a boat in the middle of the night, or a ship in the middle of the night, and this thing comes along and nobody sees it coming, and it smashes into your ship, destroys the ship. And let's say there's 4 or 5 boats out there, but they're not all together. They're, you know, they're well spaced out. And this one comes up with ships, and they can hear everybody screaming, and they can't find anything. You know, sun comes up, they see pieces of the wreckage and this and that, and they're like, and that's how the whole myth of the Kraken starts, because they've seen the damn giant squid. So you get this whole myth of the Kraken grown out of a natural phenomenon that, you know, they didn't understand. A ship goes out, never comes back, a lone ship. They go out searching for it. They find pieces of the wreckage. Nothing else. The iceberg is already gone. Or maybe it's a small iceberg that, you know, so little of the tip is sticking up, but it comes underneath the ship, hits the ship the right way, destroys the ship. So when they go out searching, you know, the iceberg is out there, you know, but it's far away from them now, but they can't see it at all. But they look at this wreckage. The only way they could remember that big beast we seen in the water. The whole story. That's how the myth of the Kraken comes out of the giant squid. It makes sense. There's an actual scientific reasoning behind myths, and that is the reasoning behind it. It makes sense. All you need to do, you know, when you spend your life reading myths, trying to find pieces of truth, you know, looking for something, you learn all these different myths and all these different folklore and all these different legends. And so, you know, you start to see the scientific reasoning behind this, the whole logic behind it, where the myths are born out of. And now, as we find more and more things, they all make more and more sense. Like the old legends of the ghost apes. Turns out the ghost apes were real. The silverback gorilla. That's the actual ghost ape. The legends and myths of the little elephants. Little elephants are real. We found them. They exist. They're real. They've been there the whole time, but science said they didn't exist, and then one day we stumble upon them. Oh shit, look, here they are. And they're all over the place. Giant, little tiny elephants. I think someday we're going to prove that the Loch Ness Monster is a giant eel. Or maybe it's a species of the eel that we never knew about. Or it's somewhere in that it froze in its evolution, just like the crocodile and the shark. And so maybe it's got some, that would explain the sightings where they see it on land, where it just looks like it's got limbs and it's awkward, but they're actually, it's still got some semblance of its flippers left, like a mudfish. So it can travel around land. It can actually travel across land, or get out on land and then go back in. The reason I think that Nessie could quite possibly be a giant eel is because there's sightings of the same, that have this same similar description. Like when they see it bulged out, it could have eaten something. Maybe it got a cow. I mean, if this thing can get up on land, maybe it got a cow. So when they saw it, it has this big bulge in it. It makes sense. The thing just ate a freaking cow. So it's going to have this big bulge in it. And then it's got its flippers, and it's doing like the mud fish. There's a scientific logic to it that when you start to think about it, you're like, okay, that makes sense. I can understand that now. Champ fits the description of Nessie. Ironically, where I come from, there's a lake in Loch Sheldrick, New York. And someone once, they put out the blow up Nessie as a joke. But the reality is there's always been a story about a Nessie-like creature in that lake also. But it's not just that lake. It's also the Neversink Reservoir, and I believe the Roundout Reservoir. I've seen some humongous eels in the Roundout Reservoir. I mean, I got up and close and personal with an 8-foot eel this big around at the Roundout Reservoir. Me, my dad, and his buddy Ronnie up there night fishing. Ronnie's bringing it in. He's fighting it. We didn't know what he had. And its head starts to come up. I was like, holy shit, that's a monster trout. And I went down. I went to grab this thing. And let me tell you, as soon as it started twisting and it came around my wrist, it didn't even get the clamp on my wrist yet. It just started to wrap around my wrist. And I knew that wasn't a trout. And I was gone. I mean, it didn't even get to finish clamping on my wrist. I just slid right out of it. Reflexes like a cat, man. I was gone. I mean, I'm scared to death of the woods at night. Keep thinking about just a minute that. And I ran into the woods. I mean, I ran clear into the woods. I quickly made it back out to that damn rock ledge with my dad and Ronnie, but I actually ran into the woods to get away from the thing that just tried to grab me. This thing was 8 foot long. And it was this big around. And there's stories of something like a Nessie out there. Now, if you can have an 8-foot eel that, you're talking a 5-inch diameter, 6-inch diameter, 5 to 6 inch diameter, then the reality, they can get bigger than that. I bet they can get bigger than that. This thing scared me. My dad wouldn't even get near. My dad wouldn't let him put it in the car. He wanted to take it home. My dad wouldn't even let him put it in the car. I don't remember what ever happened with that. Whether or not Ronnie made somebody come get him. But my dad wouldn't even let him put it in the car. I mean, this thing was... It was freaky. And I like eel fishing. I've actually been eel fishing. Eel fishing is fun. I've never seen an eel anywhere near this size. Biggest eel I've ever seen was 3 foot long, maybe 3.5 foot long. You know, maybe about that big around. You know, a good, healthy sized eel. I've never seen an eel that big. So I know they get big. And there's this description of this Loch Ness-like thing in both the Round Out, the Never Sink, as well as Loch Sheldrick Lake. The thing interesting about these 3 bodies, the Round Out and Never Sink are both reservoirs. Loch Sheldrick is a lake, but Loch Sheldrick Lake also has a fault line that runs through it. It supposedly has no bottom. Somebody went down there with the little yellow submarine, and they couldn't find the bottom of the lake. I mean, there's a fault line down there. The 3 bodies of water happen to be connected by underground channels of water, as well as old mines. All 3 of these bodies are actually connected. Technically, the Round Out, the Never Sink, and Loch Sheldrick Lake, theoretically, they're all the same water. They're not the same exact body of water, but at the same time, they kind of are the same body of water, because all 3 of them are connected with the same... All their water all goes together because of these underwater channels and these mines connecting the 3 of them. So realistically, anything that's in Loch Sheldrick Lake can wind up all the way over in the Round Out Reservoir. Anything that's in the Never Sink Reservoir can wind up in Loch Sheldrick Lake or the Round Out Reservoir. They're all connected. And it's kind of ironic that in all 3 bodies of water, there's a description of the same exact thing. So there's actually a scientific, logical explanation to this. There's something that we haven't found yet. It's just, it's the difference between reality and existence. Like I said, reality, most people consider reality everything that either you know from observation, which is why for Bigfoot believers, there's absolutely no doubt that Bigfoot exists, or it's what you've been taught, which for many of you, for example, here's another example for many of you. If you've been taught in school about the planets, and you don't pay any attention to anything that's going on in the world anymore, to you, the reality is planets are either icy, frozen, mostly water worlds like ours, which are water and rock, or worlds like Mars, which are just rock, or worlds like Jupiter, which are gas giants. That's not reality anymore. The reality is there are worlds out there that they found where half the world, literally, got your world like this. This half is actually gas. This half is rock. And as the world spins, it stays. This half is gas. This half is gas, rock, and this half is gas. This half is facing the sun. And it's so close to the sun that it turns this half of the world into a gassy planet. So as the planet is spinning like this here, it's actually turning back into rock and then turning back into gas. So the world is literally half gas and half rock. If you've never kept up with the planets, and the last time anything you were taught about the planets, your reality tells you that a planet like that cannot exist. Because let's say the last time that you say when you were in high school, say you're my age. I'm 46 years old. Think about my age for a minute there. I'm 46 years old. So in my reality, I finished school in the 90s. If you're someone like me and you haven't studied anything about anything other than what you were taught about the planets since then, there's no way in your reality that there's a half rock and half gas planet. But in existence, it actually is out there. It's real. And in the reality of science, it is now proven. So in the overall reality, even though it might not fit your reality up until right now, and you're hearing that, and now you're going on Google and you're like, no, that can't be. And you're like, holy, you're learning this. So now it's becoming part of your reality. That's the difference between reality and existence. Reality is what is understood, what is known, and what is observed. Existence is anything that is possible. And because we don't know every single possibility, we don't understand what existence is yet. We have a grasp on existence. We understand what does exist. But it doesn't mean that what we think can't exist doesn't exist. Because I guarantee you, if you, last time you learned anything about the planets was, even 10 years ago, and you just learned this, up until now, in your reality, there was no such thing as a half rocky, half gas planet. Now, it's in your reality, especially once you go on Google and you look it up, and you can find this, and go on YouTube. But the math is actually where I learned it from. Anton. He's actually the one. I watch a lot of stuff with him. I'm always learning. That's what I do. I learn. I drive a truck, so sometimes I just put YouTube and I just let it play randomly, and I just listen to YouTube all day long. Sometimes I have it set on a hashtag, and sometimes I just let it I'll just go to my home page and I'll hit the very first thing, and then I'll just let it randomly play all day long. Just listening to YouTube while I'm driving. Because I have the YouTube Premium, so my phone, I can actually turn my phone off and it's still playing through my Bluetooth. So it's not distracting me at all. It's just like listening to an audiobook, and all I'm doing is taking in, and I'm learning. And when I hear something that I think is far-fetched, I make a mental note of it, and later on I go and I check up on it. And when I find actual more things out there that actually it's like, yeah, this is real. And they actually have the data to prove it's real. I'm like, wow, I'm always learning new stuff. So, that's one of the things that science has to wrap its head around. There is a very big difference between reality and existence. I mean, think about it. When Einstein proposed black holes for, what was it? Another 40 years? Roughly 40 years? Black holes was a theory, but it wasn't a reality. And it was argued whether or not that theory was even right, that we found black holes. Now we know black holes are not only reality, but their existence. Almost anything you could dream of is likely to exist. Like, think about that. Almost anything you can dream up is likely to exist. Because we don't understand all the rules of existence. There's rules in existence that we haven't even started yet to contemplate. Yet, they're possible. Think about the cell phone. The flip phone, ironically, of all things. The flip phone, Star Trek. that wasn't reality. Wasn't even existing. You know, that can't exist. Well, obviously it could exist. Now it's in existence. And because it exists now, it could have always existed back then. Anything that we know for sure exists now, it could have always, at any point in time, it could have existed. We just needed to wrap our heads around it and have the imagination and the ingenuity to make it happen. I mean, that's the irony to technology and ingenuity. It comes from the imagination. It starts with the imagination. That's where ingenuity comes from, is the imagination. That's the difference between reality and existence. So there's a lot of things still in our own world that we don't understand. But it doesn't mean they don't exist. Just because it doesn't fit our reality doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's kind of like, you know, it's funny. I've been listening to a lot of different things, you know, basically listening for, you know, I like listening to the Bigfoot stories and interviews and stuff like that. But there's I'm going to come back to Shimmer Man. I'm going to tell you something about Shimmer Man, but I'm going to come back to that, because first I want to go to I find it interesting about the Dog Man. So on beyond explanation, somebody asked him if he thinks that Dog Man and the werewolf are one and the same, and they're two intertwined stories, and he explained why, you know, da 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 da. And, you know, again, that makes sense. There's actually a reasoning behind that. But the thing I find interesting about Dogman is Dogman, surprisingly, on paper, is a very similar description to Anubis. The New Jersey Devil, on paper, I can't remember which Egyptian god that is, but the one with the ram's head. You know, there's a lot of things that, you know, I've been thinking about while listening to this, and I'm realizing, man, it's almost like they describe. You'd be surprised how often it sounds like they're describing one of the Egyptian gods. Anubis was just an easy one, because there's a book that I listened to recently, and it involved Anubis, and so that's why when Dogman, that's why I can remember Anubis's name. But there's another Egyptian god with the goat head or ram's head, and it's amazing how much that thing fits the description of the Jersey Devil. It's interesting how similar the Thunderbird and the Phoenix, their descriptions are. Two completely so far apart. Of course, if I ever prove my theory of Atlantis, that might explain some similarities like that between Indian lore and Egyptian lore. And I have a theory, and I've actually spent years putting this together, and it's all circumstantial, but when it's actually all laid out on paper and you see it, it makes sense. There's actually, when you see it, it's almost undeniable. And there's things now that have been uncovered. Actually, it turns out that they've been uncovered for quite a while and they've just been kept quiet. But there's a lot of things coming to light now that actually links Egypt to North America, South America. There's some things we've always known, like the Egyptian camel isn't even from Egypt. Nope. The Egyptian camel is the remnant of the now extinct North American camel. The Egyptian camel is the North American camel. A lot of people don't know that. Shimmer Man is another interesting one. I don't know what to make of Shimmer Man. Here's a fact. This is a fact. You like James Bond? You ever watch James Bond? My favorite Pierce Brosnan James Bond movie is Live and Let Die. That's when I fell in love with the Aston Martin. Remember the Aston Martin? Remember how it disappears? When that movie came out, they went overboard with what the technology could do, but the technology existed. The technology actually existed. The thing is, it'd be really hard unless the windows were tinted with the same filament color. You wouldn't be able to hide the windows, and you wouldn't be able to hide the tires. Well, you could hide the tires if you had some kind of fenders that came out that would allow your front wheels to still turn, and they would follow. But it's all cameras done with a special paint that's applied to the car. You can actually make the car you can make a car disappear, but its shadow's always going to be there. And like I said, because unless you do some alterations, the tires are always going to be there, the windows are going to be there, there's going to be pieces of the car there, but overall you can make the car disappear. So like for a hunting blind, if you put that same material over the front of your hunting blind, you could have a hunting blind in the middle of the field, and as long as there's a tree line behind you, or if you're close to the tree line, that's how you can hide the shadow. If you're close to the tree line or on the tree line, you'd be completely invisible. This technology exists. It's simply done with cameras and a material. You can paint it on, or they have the kind of like it's an actual like plastic-like material. When I listen to the Shimmer Man, there's an explanation behind that. If this is really a government project, and it's possible it is. I'm going to explain to you why, because it makes sense. The more and more I've thought about it, the more and more it makes sense. Now, originally, Shimmer Man was always seen in the dark or in the woods. And the explanation behind that makes sense because it makes it easier to hide the shadow in. If you're surrounded by shadows, it's easy to hide the shadow you would cast. The reason that he shimmers, the reason you would see the shimmer is because if it's a bot, see the way my shirt? If the material is doing that, then it's gonna, every time the material moves, that'll cause a shimmer. Gives you that ripple effect. We have, like my phone. My phone has more CPU capability than I had this monster gaming computer. And that thing was from the 90s, but it was a monster. It was, that beast. This thing has more capability than that computer did. So, our computer technology is advanced so far that the idea that, something the size of this phone being dedicated to nothing but a CPU to operate that suit, it makes sense now. And I actually think I'm leaning more towards the idea that Shimmerman, especially because so many sightings of Shimmerman seem to be within reasonable vicinities of military bases or military compounds or National Guard, that seems to be, that's something that, I heard mentioned. And as soon as I heard that mentioned, the light bulb, it just clicked. Because, I kept thinking about it. I was like, man, I don't know if I could wrap my head around Shimmer. I have a hard time wrapping my head around the paranormal. I'm not completely in denial of the paranormal, but I have a hard time wrapping my head around the paranormal. And the Shimmerman thing, that was just too paranormal for me. But once I learned that so many of the sightings are within reasonable distance of some kind of military or government property or building, that made it make a lot more sense. And it's not hard to do. It's really not that hard to do. You'd be surprised that, like I said, for like a hunting blind, it's super stupid easy. If you're out in the middle of the field, you would have cast a shadow. Now, as good as computers are getting, and the way AI can manipulate in real time, I have a feeling that you could have, like out here in front of me, I'm sitting out here in a rest stop for the night. You can have a tent out there in the middle of this rest stop made from this material, and I have a feeling that because of the computing power now, it might not be a shadow. It might not cast a shadow at all. But the technology exists. The technology is real. The technology was actually just a pet project. I can't remember who it was, but it was just a pet project of somebody when the James Bond movie came out. And they actually used it on the car. And you can use it on the car. You can make the car, like I said, you can't make the glass disappear. You can't make the tires disappear. But you can actually make the bulk of the car look invisible. It's just reflective. It's a reflective camera trick. And with Shimmerman, the reason he would shimmer, you can see it. Every time that, see how the fabric just moves? That would create that shimmer effect. And that's what you would see. When you're seeing that shimmering, you're seeing the movement of the fabric. Even if he's not moving, just breathing, the fabric moves. Light breeze, the fabric moves. Holding his balance, the fabric is going to move. The fabric is just going to move. So that's what I think Shimmerman is. And the irony is, the technology is real. The technology exists. And it's stupid easy. I mean, you could almost do this yourself. It's not the cameras. That's easy. You can get the cameras. You could use any camera and projecting camera. You need high quality stuff, really expensive stuff. But this is all stuff you can buy. The hardest part would be finding the right material to do this with. And having someone write the program for you to make it work. I can't remember what exactly that material is, but it's just a reflective material. It's almost like a mirror. It's not anything complicated. You could probably even use, like, you know, if you got a big, say you got a big piece of reflective tint, you know, window tint, the reflective stuff, like what you would use in the high-rise buildings, so you get them big sheets of it. Imagine the duck blind you can make with that if you had a nephew program. I mean, you'd have to spend a lot of money on your camera equipment and projection equipment, because you need super high definition stuff. I mean, you're talking, it's not even so much, the 4K would be the best, but it's not even so much 4K. You could get away with this with the with just the super high definition. You know, it's not exactly 4K, but it's above the 1080p HD. In between 1080p HD and 4K, you have super high definition. So you just need stuff that's gonna, it has to be all super high definition, so it's expensive. And that window tinting, you make a duck blind out of that, you could be sitting there completely invisible in your yard. You just need somebody who knows how to program, and all you need is, realistically, all you need is one of these smartphones. You just wipe the smartphone and reprogram the smartphone, so that's all it's doing. It's just being a CPU unit for them cameras and nothing else. And the damn smartphone has enough memory and computing power to make this work, as long as you erase everything off of it, so it's dedicated to just that. Which means you have to erase it and reprogram the CPU and everything. But there's enough CPU power in my S9 here to pull this off. Galaxy S9, or even, you know, iPhone, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if the Galaxy S5 and S4 couldn't do it. You know, and the same with the old, you know, the Apple 4 and the Apple 5 and the Apple 6. They could probably do it. Not sure about the ones but predecessors, but I know for sure I'm almost positive the S7 could do it. So I'm sure the i7 could do it. But, you know, I imagine the i6 and the i5 could probably pull it off, as well as the S6 and S5. But the newer phones, like my S9, this thing could definitely do it. The computer power inside this damn cell phone, you wipe everything clean and reprogram that computer to do nothing but operate that system. That's what I think Shimmerman is. Because like I said, the technology exists, and to do it is really simple. And now when I post this on YouTube, I'm going to turn up dead in a couple days, and my YouTube account's going to be closed. The government's going to be like, oh my God, I can't believe it just blew our cover. Oh God, I hope I'm kidding. I'm not going to get into the UFO theories. Not right now. But, you know, it's funny how I started with Bigfoot. But, you know, yeah, I don't know. I'm tired. Have a good night. I'm sorry it's such a long damn video, but I hope you find it interesting.